Burkina Faso has decided to end a military accord that allowed French troops to fight militants on its territory, the government said on Monday. Large swathes of land have been taken over and millions displaced in the wider Sahel region. The West African country is facing an insurgency by groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State.
What happens when a nation tells one of the world's most powerful countries to pack up and leave? Within just 72 hours. That's exactly what Captain Ibrahim Traoré did in Burkina Faso. For decades, French troops were stationed across Africa, often near valuable mines, shaping the region's security and economy in ways that many argue served Paris more than locals. But when Traoré signed the order, everything changed overnight. So why was Paris so stunned? And how did Burkinabe citizens react with celebrations instead of panic?
On Saturday, Burkinabe national television reported that the government had suspended a 2018 military accord with Paris on January 18th. The next day, French President Emmanuel Macron said he was awaiting clarifications from transitional President Ibrahim Traoré, giving France 1 month to withdraw its troops.
Before we move on, I would like you to subscribe to the channel and like the video. What if military protection was never really protection, but a shield for someone else's wealth? That is the uncomfortable question many people in Burkina Faso began asking. When you look closely at the map of French bases across the Sahel, one thing stands out. They were not sprinkled randomly or placed wherever people were most at risk. Instead, many lined up with the sites of the most valuable mines in the region. Gold, manganese, and especially uranium fields became the invisible compass guiding foreign boots on African soil. On paper, it was about a partnership securing borders against armed groups. In practice, it often looked more like the fortification of supply lines feeding Europe's industries. Picture the contradiction. A convoy loaded with raw minerals, escorted by armored vehicles, moves unharmed through villages that had been attacked only days earlier. Mothers there are still rebuilding after their children's school was burned, yet a few miles away, semis full of ore are waved through with full military protection. The lives of ordinary people seemed fragile, but the flow of minerals to global markets was untouchable. That reality sparked resentment and, more importantly, a realization. Security was selective and its focus was not human lives but economic assets. The imbalance came into clearest light with uranium. Burkina Faso and its neighbors sit on deposits that power Europe's nuclear plants, keeping lights on in Paris while in Ouagadougou blackouts were a normal part of daily life. Imagine the frustration of villagers who dug wells by hand because pumps could not run consistently without electricity, while the yellow cake pulled from African soil kept European homes glowing bright. For many, it was not just unfair, but a haunting reminder of colonial patterns wearing the uniform of modern alliances. Even documents from embassies carried tones of unease. A leaked memo from Ouagadougou to Paris expressed concern over what it called sovereignty complications. That phrase alone told a deeper truth. Self-rule was being treated not as a goal to celebrate, but as a complication to be managed. The idea that Africans might want full control of their land and their choices appeared framed as a diplomatic problem, not a right. For many in Burkina Faso, the memo confirmed suspicions they long carried but rarely saw spelled out in official writing. Step after step, the picture became clearer. French troops were not only countering militants, they were securing economic arteries. The rifles and armored trucks were instruments of power, yes, but also of profit. To say they were stationed only for peacekeeping left out half the story. This was about resources, influence, and a structure that kept African wealth outward bound. That is why when Captain Traoré made his move, the shock went deeper than a diplomatic dispute. Soldiers were leaving, but so was the scaffolding of an entire system. What happens when a country not only cuts ties with a powerful patron, but actually grows stronger in the outcome? For Burkina Faso, this is not a distant theory, but a living moment in history. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré signed the executive order demanding that all French forces leave in just a matter of days, the effect was immediate. Phones rang across ministries in Paris, NATO corridors buzzed, and African capitals waited anxiously to see if the small landlocked nation would crumble or rise. The decision was not couched in polite diplomacy. It came with a sharp deadline, a clear rejection, and the unmistakable tone of a country reclaiming its own course. Western governments quickly voiced their worry. Aid was suspended almost overnight. Development projects that had once depended on donor funds suddenly froze. Corporations that extracted gold and other minerals paused operations, claiming they could no longer guarantee stability. Analysts appeared on international networks, warning that Burkina Faso was standing at the edge of collapse, abandoned by its its greatest partner. Commentators described inevitable food shortages, an imploding economy, and a dangerous vacuum for extremists to exploit. Their tone suggested that sovereignty itself was reckless. Meanwhile, in Paris, the reaction bordered on disbelief. National papers ran urgent headlines asking how France had lost a partner that for decades had been considered secure. Television hosts debated in live panels where the blame should fall: on foreign policy missteps, on disregard for local voices, or on simple arrogance. The central question repeated again and again was blunt: how did we lose Burkina Faso in one morning? For French policy circles, the humiliation was public. Centuries of influence in West Africa had faced one of its most visible blows. Inside Burkina Faso, however, events took shape in an entirely different rhythm. In Ouagadougou and in provincial towns, people stepped into the streets carrying national flags and chanting for independence. Young people who had grown up under the shadow of foreign troops claimed the moment as proof that their generation would not repeat their parents' deferential stance. What foreign observers described as the beginning of chaos was felt domestically as the first breath of true self-determination. Citizens gathered not in fear, but in an energy that united poor neighborhoods and prosperous districts alike. Yet independence without allies could not survive long. Traoré understood the practical need for new partnerships and acted with speed. Diplomatic delegations opened channels with China and Russia, seeking investment in infrastructure and arms without the strings once attached to Western assistance. Delegates flew to Turkey, India, and Brazil, expanding trade and technology exchanges outside the European orbit. The African Development Bank also stepped forward, signaling readiness to fund projects that could ground the economy in African support. Instead of shrinking, Burkina Faso's network widened toward both regional allies and global powers open to a multipolar future. Security, the most fragile element of national life, also shifted in design. Rather than waiting for external armies to decide priorities, Burkina Faso expanded community defense forces led by its own officers. These units drew knowledge from local terrain and culture, giving them both legitimacy and practical advantage. At the same time, cooperation with Mali and Niger formed a new axis of regional security. Joint patrols, intelligence sharing, and coordinated strategies began to replace the foreign-centered model. Gradually, statistics from regions once most violent showed a